It is the contention of Mr. Best that enslaved African Guyanese were and continue to be indigenous to the land they worked for centuries ago. He also submitted to the Commission that Afro-Guyanese were never an overly dominant grouping in this country. The retired Rear Admiral told the Commission that the fact that the colonial legislature used its legal powers to institute unjust laws which prevented freed Africans from acquiring their lands underscored the importance that the state of Guyana should now use its legislative power to enact just laws that will provide restorative justice to the descendants of enslaved Africans in the form of land.
Is the allocation of a portion of land to the descendants of enslaved Africans as reparatory and restorative justice for the sufferings endured by our ancestors, commencing with a violent removal by the Europeans and consequent deprivation of their lands in Africa, and for the continued deprivation of lands in Guyana while being enslaved, even as they toiled the lands of this country without payment for over 200 years, but paradoxically deprived of those same lands at emancipation. My proposal is that this allocation of land shall be protected by legislation and held in a perpetual trust on behalf of the descendants of freed Africans for the purposes of productive development and for mitigating and ameliorating the current and future conditions of the African Guyanese.
Mr. Best told the Commission that the people of African descent are still working to repair the cultural genocide at the hands of the British oppressors. To that extent, therefore, Mr. Best said that it is important that the lands and cultural rights of African Guyanese be protected under the Constitution of Guyana.
Reparations and restorative justice will allow Guyana as a state to enact laws that correct the injustices committed by unjust laws enacted during and post-enslavement through legal bodies with quasi-judicial powers such as this Commission of Inquiry to hear evidence and bring the matter to closure through the actions of the state in the form of policy actions, including legislation.
Mr. Best also recommended an African Land Titling Act. He is of the view that there is nothing in Guyana that prevents the state from enacting just laws to provide justice for the descendants of African Guyanese.
The state of Guyana, as a successor state to the British colonial state, has an obligation to accept the history and ancestry of the African Guyanese and enact laws to correct the injustices perpetrated against them. We in Guyana are not inherently a racial people. However, we are trapped in this constructed racial regime introduced and perfected by the British, with us as the key players. In that sense, we continue to react in different ways to the wrongs committed against us by the British by attacking not the British system, but our fellow Guyanese.
The Commission plans to take some of Mr. Best's recommendations into consideration. The second session of the Lands Commission of Inquiry has ended and the third session is slated to commence next week. Roy and James, HGP Nightly News.